our next reader is the leader of an outlaw art group that doesn't actually exist. And he's even written a book to prove it. After graduation, he hopes to find gainful employment at a place befitting his talent and skill, something like a sandwich shop or a discount costume outlet. Seriously, if anybody knows anyone who's hiring, he's got a stack of resumes under his chair. But really, I kid only because he's such a good sport. Always quick to laugh with you, to let you in on the joke. And that's something about him I will always appreciate. Please welcome Michael.
Hello, everyone. This is a lot of people. My printer broke this morning, so got to read off my phone, which is annoying. But as they say in offices, it is what it is. Writing an essay about trips I took over in England last summer, and especially people who influenced me on that trip. This particular story is about someone that I know who died, so it's a little sad, but it's also very, hopefully, uplifting too, as death can often be. It's called Lioness. Just bear with me because I don't read on phones very often. It was last July when I found out Michelle had died. When I heard the news, I was on the eve of a train trip from London toward the very edge of Cornwall, England, a place called Land's End, from which I would take a ferry to the Scilly Islands. The Scilly Islands were, well, not silly, but they were all but unknown in the U.S. and very treasured secret among the English. I was very much excited to quit chaotic London and make it to these remote, obscure, and sparsely populated islands. My friend Arthur had emailed me the news of Michelle's death because he figured rightly I'd want to know. Michelle hadn't been that much on my mind for several years, except when certain aspects of her had appeared in a couple of my stories or poems. My friend Arthur, though, had been there during the more euphoric parts of our brief relationship. He knew how deeply I'd once cared for her. According to what Arthur heard, and which was later confirmed, Michelle had taken her own life. She was a year shy of turning 30. That night before I went to the Land's End, I cried hard and fast for Michelle, an ex-girlfriend that I hadn't seen her talk to in over 6 years. A part of me was almost surprised by how sad I actually was. My mourning was very strange at first. Then quickly it wasn't strange at all. For someone I'd once loved was now gone, someone I believed to be, in her own enigmatic ways, a lovely and wonderful and truly singular human being, in spite of our difficult parting and those hard feelings associated with it, as well as the fact I didn't really know anything about her life since we had gone our separate ways 6 years ago. But then in the weeks to come, I was surprised by how my sadness for Michelle changed its timbre and became something almost reverential and more expansive. Such grief becomes a passageway into seldom explored sensations. Perhaps it was because I had never felt this particular kind of bereavement before, so I became very curious about its tangents and its tributaries. Perhaps, too, it was because I was experiencing this new feeling in truly novel conditions. Alone for most of a month, save for sheep and cows, horses and crows, in the rural and tidal wilderness of another country, walking on overgrown pathways that had been used for thousands of years by pilgrims, thieves, farmers, and traders. The intricate granite tors of St. Mary's Island and the lichen-covered boulders of the ancient village ruins by the bright green shore, as well as the humbling presence of the ancient Nag's Head standing stone, almost a cross between a giant elk and a minotaur, and the hilltop Bronze Age funeral cairns in which, as I gladly did, you can crawl within and lie for a while in the cold mossy stones, as the ancient dead once did. This land bespoke the need for ancestral frequencies. And the Scillys, too, were thought by some to be part of the fabled Arthurian land of Lyonesse, the home of Tristan. He was famous for, I forget which, but when I finish this essay, I will find that out. Plus, the Scillys are also notorious for their shipwrecks. So my grief for Michelle became a spiritual way to honor, in a sense, one of my life's own ancestors. Even if our friendship And our love, or my love, if that's what it might have been, had become sundered and obscured through time and absence. But of course, too, my grief was also a way, however accidentally, to honor and face my own struggles with attachment, with loss, with love, and with death. All those necessities that make spiritual work as well such a necessity, at least for some of us. I had hundreds of miles of England's ancient sacred land to explore in breezy solitude. So it seemed only fitting my demons and daemons would be conversed with along the way. So as awful as her premature passing was, I could at least honor Michelle's memory in my thoughts and actions, especially in the countless medieval chapels and churches and cathedrals on my journeys, but also in the groves and fields and ancient trackways along the way. And a common practice in a lot of spiritual and devotional work, especially in Hinduism or Christian mysticism, is to turn one's thoughts into sacrifices, to turn neural activity into ritual flames. Indeed, mental activity can hopefully become incendiary and thus purifying. But how crowded my solitude became, alone on foot in rambling countryside and desolate rain-blown beaches. My thoughts and memories changed their rhythm when I was walking for hours through the eerie moors and meadows and rocky bluffs of the Scilly Islands. And then later, the endless green and bronze and chalk countryside of Dorset and Surrey and Glastonbury and Salisbury. The beaches, coves, standing stones, rocks, and grassy hills of the Scilly Isles comprise one of the most beautiful, unspoiled places I have ever been to. And it was curious and strangely comforting to see how Michelle's presence became a part of that wild aloneness. Often, I think, our most instructive companions are the truly unexpected ones. Michelle had adored beaches and oceans, and photos of her where indeed, and the photos of her where indeed she looks the most fulfilled are taken by the shore. And I imagine she would have swooned over St. Mary's Island and St. Anne's in the Scillies. It was a total accident that I even heard of them. In the title page to a thin book of prose written by the American poet H.D., Notes on Thought and Vision, she inscribed it with The Scilly Islands, July 1919. The short, fragmented essay attempts to make sense of a vision the poet had on those islands, her so-called jellyfish vision, in which she apprehended a higher, more non-dualistic consciousness. This island vision had come on the heels of various losses and afflictions, and within a world that was in the grips of war. So I had wondered what it'd be like to have such a vision, a healing vision at that, as the one that she had described. So I decided as a pilgrim, as an amateur pilgrim, and above all, as just an amateur, I would make the Scillies one of my summer destinations. Not that I was expecting to relive H.D.'s own epiphanies, but I wanted to see and perhaps feel something of what she had felt back in those cataclysmic days of 1919. For I had, for some time, taken H.D. to be one of my most formative ancestors. Around the same time I heard of Michelle's passing, two other things happened, but I'm going to speak of one of them because we're lacking time. A dear friend and mentor I had been corresponding with said the following sentence to me: I am beholden to you. I received the message right when I was boarding an overbooked train to Land's End. And that phrase alone astonished me. Beholden, although it technically implies a duty or obligation, has a different, much warmer, almost more spiritual ring to me. Like beloved, it suggests a bond forged of mutual and complex intimacy and shared reverential attention. Saying it almost sounds like an incantation or a prayer, and perhaps it is and should be one. So on that trip, I asked myself, who or what am I beholden to? The question felt especially heavy in those early days on those rainy islands. One answer occurred to me. Well, the intricate, often misunderstood beauty of the world is what I want to be beholden to. A world with all its devastated creatures and futile yearnings and discordant relations, as well as its glowing fields, tranquil cows, ancient temples, fiery marigolds, and green-flushed sunsets. A world of ceaseless life and death built from ancestors. Yet a world, too, in which a young woman undergoes so much pain, she feels she has no choice but to leave the world. Sorry. It's entirely possible the world stays beautiful when she is gone, but in a slightly more obscure way. Every moment then, the world gets richer with ancestors, their atoms flushed with others. Such beauty remains possible, but not without bearing the pains of others or hearing the pains of others. And I need to repeat this to myself as a prayer and listen as well as I can to those who cannot feel this beauty and who cannot say this prayer. For prayer, too, is a thought that has become a flame. Pardon me. All right, I got a few more minutes, right? All right. A little over 6 years ago was the last time I talked to Michelle. It was likely that then we had recently made our own antic bike ride towards the Land's End beach in San Francisco. Indeed, we had first met as total strangers on our bicycles one dusk, pedaling easily with our mutual friends past the wharf shops, then deep up into the elevated grasses and groves and marble stairs of Land's End. A word like Land's End conjures a ragged, sand-varnished, ancient and dramatic vista. Sublime and melancholy, yes, but also something quite forgotten in our very overly domesticated lexicons. I was glad for the consonants of my own two Land's Ends, one in England and one in California. Anybody who met her never forgot her. Michelle was full of thoughtful mischief and insolent theatricality, and her style, her smile, her speech, and strange clothes radiated these traits. Fashion and textiles were her passions, but so were their larger healing implications. The abilities to transform and to beguile and to empower and to enchant and to beautify. These potentials were the very reason we made our shabby and chaotic and often shitty homes in San Francisco in the first place, for we hungered for enchantment and adventure and beauty in all their most raw forms. And back then, at least, you didn't have to have a lot of money or a certain phone app or a devastating sense of apathetic irony or a lot of vetted social status to find these things. What you did need, though, especially if you wanted some semblance of joy, was that cultivated yet sincere wildness she embodied, the kind that means you're prepared to participate in mystery on very short notice. Because why else live in a city if you don't want to plunge full tilt into mystery? At the same time, she blended a kind of Huck Finish rakishness with a tough tenderness, too. For the city was violent, and her life then, I remember, had its seedy and violent elements, like the abusive and dying roommate she had to be a begrudging nurse to. But it was a price paid for a kind of freedom. There was no point in loving life without just a little bile, a few rusty edges, and a few absurd threats to security and mental well-being. This combination of toughness and warmth, performativity and sincerity was most vividly expressed in her voice, which was almost mysteriously deep, I recall, somewhat husky, but always edged with a mischievous yet life-affirming laugh. I'll never forget, though, that one of the last things she ever said to me was about how her pain was something I could never know. Over these last few years, I'd occasionally wondered if it might be nice to get in touch, to maybe even try to be friends again. Friendship could be good, I reasoned. Wisely or not, I'll never know now. The last I'd heard she was happily dating someone, that made me very glad for her. I wanted her to be happy. But also, I found I was very curious about her life, and I also wanted her to be happy and fulfilled and in the company of good and inspiring people. But something, perhaps fear or pride, or its very toxic alliance, prevented me from contacting her, and before I could make any attempt, she was gone. But in Vegas now, almost a year later, this pilgrimage resumes. This pilgrimage that I began in England is one where field and city, the dead and the alive, waking and dreaming, clouds and grasses, companion and ancestor become as blurred as some remote coastline, notorious for shipwrecks. And this island I keep alighting on the heart. For the heart too has its geography, as well as its mountain guides, its forest dwellers, its lighthouse keepers, and its dark park sentinels. Michelle is one of them, and I'm grateful. The end.